Hello ladies and gentlemen. So this week in geography we are looking at two very important concepts for the A-level and indeed for geographers in general, and that is the idea of space and scale. And the study task for this week, you'll remember last week I in the presentations asked you guys to start looking at the RGS competition for the Young Geographer of the Year. So this week we're going to talk about planning your essay around the data that you have managed to find. And we'll talk about how you can sort of structure an essay and your writing using Peel paragraphs, and how you can write conclusions that will kind of help you to really write a nice evaluation to your essays. This is a very important skill as we move on to the A-level, as about 40%, well in fact exactly 40% of the marks are from 20-mark essays in your final A-level marks. And there will be one 20-mark essay in every section of your A-level exam for AQA. So the ability to write a strong argument is essential to the success of students at A-level. A number of models can be used to help you structure your paragraphs, to focus on arguments and to help you to really analyse information and apply your knowledge to the context. My suggestion is you use the Peel model for paragraphs, and I'll run through exactly what that means. So Peel basically is the first thing you do in your paragraph, your argument paragraph, is to provide your point, so what your main argument is for this paragraph. And try, if you can do, to give each argument its own individual paragraph, and that will allow you to explore those arguments fully and to develop them. The next thing you will need to do is to explain, evaluate and analyse your argument to show the clear reasoning for your viewpoint. So explain why you have put forward that argument. And as you are doing that, if you can also integrate within your explanation examples, so selective information from case studies, to give your argument greater credibility and to give your analysis greater credibility, as you can demonstrate your arguments rather than just simply sort of stating it. And then you will want to link back to the question to evaluate how significant this argument is overall. And you could do this using spatial or temporal scale as a means of evaluation, which is why we're looking at space and scale this week as an important means of evaluation. And once you've done sort of in a 20-mark essay, probably 3, maybe 4 argument paragraphs like this, you are then going to want to write your conclusion to show your overall judgment. And it's important that in your conclusion, you reach a judgment that is supported by your subsequent arguments in your essay. So the examiner can kind of see that you were leading to it. So try not to introduce new material into your essay. And in exam conditions, when planning an essay, I would say it's good to decide what your final judgment is going to be at the start. And this will enable you to focus your arguments to leading the examiner towards that in your plan. And unlike at GCSE, the conclusion needs to be a substantial paragraph rather than just a couple of sentences. And ensure in timed conditions you give yourself the time to write your conclusion fully. And to help you do this, we use the model DST. Again, there's a number of methods, but it is key that you include key information, key evaluative comments that will help you to gain marks. And as I said, the reason for this is the 20-mark essays for AQA are actually worth 40% of your final grade. And there will be, as I said, one 20-mark essay with AQA in each topic. So it's vital that we really start practicing this skill and being evaluative from day 1 in September. And indeed, in this transition work, we'll make a little bit of a start to this. So the DST model, the D stands for the decision. So that's what your final judgment actually is. All essay questions will require some sort of judgment, and they are subjective. So you can argue either side. There will be enough information to do that. So this is your chance to make that judgment and to show why you've done it. Try to avoid absolutely sitting on the fence. Even if the judgment is only partial, so kind of I agree with this statement but, or I disagree with this statement but, or I partially agree with this statement, or I partially disagree with this statement, that's fine, but never be entirely neutral. So the S of the DST is the supporting evidence that you have for this decision. And this is a summary of the main reasons for your decision from your argument paragraphs. So you shouldn't really be introducing any new arguments at this point, but you are evaluating and summarizing the key arguments from the subsequent paragraphs in your essay. And then the T is thinking about time and space. And this is a consideration of whether your view is always that case or whether it will vary over time and space. For example, is this a longer term? Is this the case in the longer term? Or in the shorter term, perhaps other factors might be more significant, and really it's only until you look at the longer term that your argument becomes more relevant. Or if your argument is perhaps significant on a global scale, but on a local scale, other factors could be more influential, and this is a key way to evaluate the arguments in geography essays, looking at these. So, as I said, the data task for this week, from your data you found for the RGS competition, decide a judgment of what your data set shows overall, and plan 3 to 5 peel paragraphs for different arguments using your data. Plan your conclusion. You may start writing your essay once you have done that, but make sure you have a detailed plan before you start writing. And I think that's a very important skill, is planning essays, as the best essays are in fact planned at A-level. And to help you with this week we are going to look at 2 important evaluative concepts, so the idea of space and the idea of scale. Space, when we come to the topic of changing places, will have its very own separate definition, but when we are considering it for the purposes of arguments, what we're really thinking about is things like spatial distribution and the change to transfers and movements over different distances and different times. For changing places, it's a far more abstract concept, and space is defined as a realm without meaning, and this is a disputed concept as well, but as I said, very abstract. But for the purposes of our kind of evaluative essays, when we're thinking about space, we can use space for arguments to consider them as a way of assessing how the world is arranged and the processes and relationships between different locations and places. And a key way of analysing different phenomena is looking at the variation of spatial distributions, which can be human geography, can be physical geography, and can look at the interactions between different systems. And I'm going to show you a number of images, and in fact there are a number of images, and you can go through this in your own time, to identify for all these different spatial distributions what the human causes were, what the physical causes were, whether that distribution is part of a physical or a human geography system, what other systems that would interact with, and if there's any examples of feedback within this system or example. And there's a few examples. There's the example of global biomes that you can see on this slide. There's the example of urban populations that you can see on this slide. And there is also the example of palm oil production and consumption on this slide. So feel free to work through those in your own time. The second concept that we're going to look at is this idea of shrinking space. And technological developments have actually meant that gaps between places have effectively been shrinking over time because it takes less time to go to places, less time to interact with places and so on. So what I'd like you to think about is what impacts this is having on the environment, what impacts this is having on population, and overall whether you think this idea of time-space compression is a positive thing. And there's a little diagram that you can see on this page that kind of explains that idea of time-space compression more clearly, and you can see it's all to do with kind of technological developments as we've gone through time, and how those have actually led to the world effectively becoming a smaller space. And think of examples where this perhaps influences you in your life when you are looking at this. So the second big concept, space is one, scale is the second one that's very important as a way to analyse information. Now we can think about scale in a more practical sense. For example, maps will always have a scale that shows the kind of size and extent of something, and likewise the same with graphs and things like that. But scale can also be used to assess the causes, issues and solutions to particular activities from a different perspective. So you can look at things from a local perspective, a national perspective, a regional perspective, and indeed a global perspective. And this can be a very useful tool, particularly towards the end of Peel paragraphs or indeed in evaluative conclusions, when we are looking at the different perspectives of things. And to help you think about that, I would like you to watch this documentary, short documentary on Storm Harvey or Hurricane Harvey from 2017, and also carry out some research about Hurricane Harvey and try to assess the impacts of Hurricane Harvey on a local, national and global scale. Try to categorise those impacts as well as social, environmental and economic, and then assess which of the three scales has had a most significant social impact, which has had a most significant environmental impact, and which has had a most significant economic impact. And the link for that can be found on the slide. Let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, good luck for this week.